that exercise. Doing the exercise of automatic writing was really great, and the responses, about 30, so more than half is good. The rest of you could still do it, and that will be fantastic. I want to continue. You've seen my automatic writing thing this session. For the previous session, I wrote about Bataille and things. I got out more than 8 lines there. And I made the point about the surrealists having written several novels using this automatic writing style. And then thinking about how grammar and prepared speech and the way in which we learn languages and the way in which we learn to be polite and so on conditions what we write and say. What we think might be different, although of course obviously we are conditioned to think too by the news, by the media, by education, so on. And the question is whether it's possible to break out of this control, whether we want to break out of this control. You can break too far, you can become a wild person. But the control of order, of grammar, it's probably not possible. There's a follower of the Surrealists, inspired by the Surrealists, an American writer called William Burroughs that I really love, who used to say, just to provoke people, that language was a control, thought control, and we had to break with it by doing experiments. And he had various experiments that he would do. But he argued that language was a kind of like a virus from outer space, which is interesting in itself, right? So, Bataille and Michel Leary would do these exercises together, these writing experiments, and the others. They're sitting around in cafes in the Left Bank in Paris, right? With Nancy Cunard there. Her publishing house was just a few doors up from the two maggots. I think that's how you say it. And the Surrealists would meet once every day or twice a day, even in these cafes, and sometimes do these games and so on. And then people who are close to them, like Raymond Roussel, the novelist of Phantom Afrique, would do other experiments to write his novels. Paragraphs inside paragraphs inside of paragraphs, and he had this triangular way of working out like a process for generating text. And they would explore things like autoethnography, which has become popular nowadays, but is sort of a bit cheesy and like embarrassing because it's too self-conscious. But it was Leary that traveled from the very west coast of Africa in Dakar in Senegal, country Senegal, French colonial, right across the mid-range of the widest part of Africa, across to Djibouti in Sudan, and recorded this huge diary of which we have it's a day-to-day compendium of basically what he was thinking. He was just describing all sorts, right? I mean, he is thinking about anthropology. He says at one point that, actually not in the diary, but in a footnote, in a letter written at the same time to Zeta, his girlfriend, that he's trying to think of his work. And that he thinks that this work studying circumcision and ritual will be as interesting as that of Malinowski's. He wants to do research on sexuality, but he's also recording things like, in the evening I had dinner with the governor. It's an odd sensation to find oneself suddenly and apparently back among Europeans. It talks about going to the zoo where the children were ecstatic over birds and monkeys. It talks about a dream. The mission ship is sinking. The ship itself is the building of 12 Rue Wilhelm, where he lived in Paris. So he records like things that aren't relevant to being in Africa at all, and he records African stuff, and then he has lots of photographs that he's included. Where's some of the parts I've marked? Well, I can just take random bits. So it's cool again this evening. So cool that sweaters have some meaning again, and one can speak without irony of the cold season. I have a horror of this world, of aesthetes, moralists, and non-commissioned officers. Neither colonial adventure nor devotion to science will ever reconcile me to any of these categories. So, this is the thing. At one point, he even describes how satisfying it was one day to go to the toilet, to have a very satisfying morning shit. Is that ethnography? Is that something that should go into the book? He's trying to decide, should I include that? Is that scientific? If you want to document everything, and the recording device is yourself, as a participant observer, don't you have to you have to make decisions about what is to be included and what not. And that's really hard, at least for him. And it's very interesting that he says as much. There's a similarly big book. Maybe the problem is these guys just need editors. There's a similarly big book called Let Us Now Praise Famous Men by James Agee that I really would recommend everyone read, where he does a similar thing with the cotton pickers, poor working class families picking cotton in the 1930s in the South of America. And that's similar. And then, in Bataille's work, he thinks, we should study everything. So there's even that article I mentioned about the big toe. And in the work of the filmmaker, Jean Rouch, and always anthropology, more so than sociology, anthropology is always bound up with visual culture. The photographs of Malinowski, the photographs we'll look at next week with Evans Pritchard, as read through Geertz, or the filmmaking of Jean Rouch, like La Maître Fou, The Crazy Masters, which I could show a little bit of. Yeah, I think I could. This film, it's in French, but I'll turn on Ting Viet subtitles, which won't be perfect, but will give you some idea, is made 50s, I think, but was really controversial. No, 30s, really controversial when it got back to Paris, because people said, why did you make a film like that? Why have you shown these people doing this? And it's interesting because they seemingly are doing something very savage, but what they're also doing is a kind of performance for themselves to work out what the crazy Europeans have been doing when they have these things like conferences and march around with ceremonial marching guns and so on. How crazy the masters are, the crazy masters. Anyway, we'll watch a little bit of it just to give you a sample of this film. And I'll link to it in the e-learning, so you can watch it all if you want. Let me try and find it. Yeah. So I have to turn my sound off a little bit. French into Vietnamese. All right. Great thing about technology nowadays, we can get at least approximately a good translation. And I need to turn off my sound. So I'll skip forward in parts of it because we can't watch the whole thing, but I hope sorry, we will get to see 3 bits of the film. The intro part where it's their everyday lives, they're describing what these characters do. Then they go into the jungle, into the forest, and put on this performance where they try and kind of perform to work out what it is that the masters, the colonists, do when they have all these ceremonies. And then it goes back to their life back in Nigeria. Okay, Lagos, in the capital.
Capitale de la Gold Coast, est une véritable Babylone noire. Ici se retrouvent des hommes venus de toute l'Afrique occidentale, de Nigeria, du Niger, de Haute-Volta, du Soudan, pour vivre la grande aventure des villes africaines. Dans ces villes, le trafic ne s'arrête jamais, le bruit ne s'arrête jamais. À Accra, la communauté la plus intéressante est peut-être celle des Abrama, des Sonrai et des Djerma venus de la région de Gao et de Niamey. Ils sont dockers sur le port. Ils sont sumuguli, smugglers, contrebandiers. Ils sont kaya-kaya, porteurs et manœuvres. Grass boy, fabricants de gazon anglais. Hygiene boys, tueurs de moustiques. Cattle boys, bergers et marchands de troupeaux sur les grands marchés d'Accra ou de Koumassi. Bottle boys, marchands de vieilles bouteilles de bière. Tin boys, marchands de bidons vides. Timber boys, marchands de bois de charpente. Gutter boys, nettoyeurs de caniveaux dans les grandes villes. Gold mine boys, les garçons des mines d'or. On retrouve tous les soirs après le travail, réunis autour de Mukaila Kiri, Mukaila du sel. Ils abandonnent bientôt la grande route pour prendre cette route qui fut peut-être la première route macadamisée d'Afrique et qui aujourd'hui est envahie par les herbes folles. Puis il faut par une marche d'1 heure gagner la concession de Muntieba. Muntieba, un homme du Niger, planteur de cacao, qui est le grand prêtre de tous les Haouka. Les chiffons de couleur sont pendus dans le ciel. Ils s'appellent Union Jack. Et au-dessous se trouve la statue du gouverneur, avec ses moustaches, son sabre, son fusil, ses chevaux. La première partie de la cérémonie est la présentation d'un nouveau. C'est un homme, il est tombé malade il y a 1 mois. Depuis 1 mois, il a des crises continuelles. Il couche dans les cimetières, il déterre des cadavres. Les hommes savent simplement qu'il est possédé par un Haouka. Et Mukaila Kiri, avec son chapeau mou, veille sur lui. Il n'a pas le droit encore de porter un casque. Dans 2 mois, 3 mois peut-être, il sera initié quand il le demandera. Mais pour le moment, c'est la simple présentation. Il sort avec ni derrière, mais au milieu. Le sang est versé sur l'autel de béton armé et sur une termitière peinte en noir et blanc de sacrifice. Et gardé par une sentinelle, Muntieba casse ses œufs sur les marches et sur les balcons du palais du gouvernement. Gerba, l'un des punis, entendant la musique, veut se mêler au cercle des danseurs. Mais il n'a pas le droit d'être là, puisqu'il n'est pas encore possédé. Et Muntieba le chasse vers la brousse. L'impuissant aussi est chassé. Et des sentinelles sont placées tout autour de la concession. Claquant les fusils de bois, elles interdisent l'entrée des punis. D'autres sentinelles tiennent sous leur feu ceux qui vont être possédés, dans la position du tireur debout ou du tireur couché. Et la possession commence. Lentement, par signe, il dit « Je t'entends, mais je ne suis pas encore arrivé. » Et le lieutenant vient saluer son gouverneur. Une femme est tombée sur le sol. C'est la Magazia, l'une des reines des prostituées d'Accra. Elle est possédée par un génie femme, Madame Salma. Madame Salma, c'est la femme du lieutenant Salmon, l'un des officiers français qui vint le premier au Niger à la fin du siècle dernier. Madame Salma a reçu la robe et le casque colonial. Elle va faire l'inspection de la nouvelle statue du gouverneur. Puis le lieutenant casse un œuf sur la tête du gouverneur. Pourquoi un œuf? Pour imiter le plumet que les gouverneurs britanniques portent sur leur casque. Car le voilà, le véritable gouverneur. Au Trooping de Colors de l'ouverture de l'Assemblée à Accra. Canon tonne, et dans cette foule, il y a des Haoukas qui sont venus ici pour chercher leur modèle. Et si l'ordre est différent ici et là, le protocole est bien le même. Dit, il faut que l'on ramène des morceaux de viande pour les hommes d'Accra qui ne sont pas venus. Il faut que l'on ramène du bouillon de ce chien dans des bouteilles de parfum vides. Et la locomotive continue ses allers-retours entre le palais du gouvernement et la pierre de sacrifice. Moukaïla. Il dit, Moukaïla, Moukaïla, la fête de ces chiens crus ou cuits, mais simplement de jouer aux cartes. Madame Lokotoro, la femme du docteur, nous l'avons rencontrée chez Punjabi. Madame Lokotoro est magasinier. C'est un garçon peut-être un peu efféminé qui use beaucoup de vaseline pour cheveux, mais c'est un excellent vendeur. Le caporal de garde possède 3 camions. Il a le monopole de la vente des gravillons aux travaux publics d'Accra. Le lieutenant d'ordonnance est voleur à la tire. Il guette ses clients sous les arcades de la CFAO. Le général, dans le civil, est simple soldat. Et par un hasard extraordinaire, c'est devant le Mental Hospital, devant l'hôpital psychiatrique d'Accra, que nous trouverons l'état-major. Le gouverneur, le conducteur de locomotive, le conducteur de camion. Ils sont employés aux waterworks, aux travaux d'adduction d'eau de la ville. Ceux qui étaient punis comme Gerba se sont rasés les cheveux. Ils ne sont plus impurs. Et en voyant ces visages souriants, en apprenant que ces hommes sont peut-être les meilleurs ouvriers de l'équipe des waterworks, en comparant ces visages avec ces visages horribles de la veille, on ne peut s'empêcher de se demander si ces hommes d'Afrique ne connaissent pas certains remèdes qui leur permettent de ne pas être des anormaux, mais d'être parfaitement intégrés à leur milieu. Des remèdes que nous ne connaissons pas encore.
So, yeah, you can probably guess why this was controversial when it was shown in France. because sacrifice and drinking alcohol and frothing in the mouth of these people, and it's framed with the introduction to the people. These are people with normal jobs living in the city, and at the end, these people spending their weekend off on this strange weekend entertainment. And part of it is explained as a kind of imitation of the masters. So the statue, for example, that they're caring for and all pretending to have these roles of crazy Europeans, has the eggs are smashed on its head and dribbled down, and that's a mimetic imitation of the plumes on the soldiers' costumes and so on, which are incomprehensible. And for Rouge, this is a working through of a kind of not sympathetic magic, but mimetic comprehension. And these people do this to juggle the contradictions of their experience of colonialism and so on. And so it became hugely controversial. And some people said that Rouge should not show this film. It portrays Africans in a bad light, and others, including Africans, said, no, this is showing that even the poor, the working class, have a resistance to, who knows, really? But the idea of getting through to the unconscious of the practice of the social, well, we have to try and make up our own minds about what it's really about. It's this kind of thing was in this French tradition of exploring a reality behind the appearance of the fetish character of things as they're presented to us. Okay. And Lurie is a big part of exactly that. And as he's traveling across Jacques Djibouti. Of course, when Lurie was angsting about doing this fieldwork, he's wondering what he should record and so on. At the same time, he was taken seriously as a member of French society and had a lot of respect. And here he is in a tuxedo and so on. And he, and Bataille's working in the Bibliothèque Nationale, they were intellectuals in society, right? They were not just run-of-the-mill members of society. And Lurie was establishment, though he kind of gives up going off to Africa and wanting to explain others out there and spends, his next 4 books, I think, are all reflections on his own life, working out where he got the desire to know, or like he's trying to study curiosity to really understand where does the desire to know something come from. And at one point, there's a beautiful piece in something where he's talking about his childhood, and when he was a teenager or something, he was always curious, he says. And he was sitting on a windowsill watching people go about their business in the street down below, but then his eyes sort of focused on the windowsill. The paint was a bit old and peeling, the wood was flaking and so on. And his first thought was, what does that taste like? And so he licks it. Crazy, but not more crazy than any other search for knowledge, is his point. And he says that he was always interested to find out more things, and you can find out something from everything, even the taste of metallic taste of paint on an old piece of wood on a windowsill is as important and as less important, as insignificant as any other piece of knowledge. Of course, that's not true because of politics, but it's interesting to raise the question. What is it that drives someone to want to know something? That's an anthropological question. And Lurie is a part of the random that. Now, Lurie came back into anthropology through the work of of James Clifford. Carrie Clanton, in the essay that you will have read, introduces Larie's work, or rather introduces Clifford introducing Larie's work as surrealist ethnography. And it's supposed to be an isolated case, but I don't think that Larie's work is isolated at all. Documents, and even before the mission from Dakar to Djibouti, it got halfway, there were a huge number of entries in the documents. And the journal itself was gathering, not isolated, gathering lots of approaches towards anthropological representation and challenging the way in which fieldwork collection went on. And sure, the Dakar Djibouti expedition brought back a lot of material to Paris, to France, which is still there in the museums. Like, as if African museums can't look after that stuff. Why doesn't it get sent back? Of course, you might think of why French museums don't send all the Champa sculpture and all the artifacts that they took from Vietnam back as well, or why the British don't send the Elgin marbles or the tons of stuff from Australia, from New Zealand, from India, from all over the world. The British Museum and Clive's house, why is that not all being sent back? This can be a theme, right? A running theme of because anthropology and capture of artifacts went hand in hand. It's not just ideas and stories that are taken, it's the material culture as well. Larrie was aware of this. He was always writing about the collection of fetishes and objects, and even the clothing of the people of Senegal and Guinea. And he hears about the crisis of Europe and laments being, that the coming war might be the end of Christian civilization. But then he's also thinking, well, you're heading towards that horror. It would probably be necessary to have a terrible but necessary war. And he's worried about getting all this stuff home and guilty about taking all this stuff as well, buying things that may or may not be interesting, and it may or not be worthwhile or ethically correct to buy them. There's the exoticism of buying, the obsession with the exotic. Why is this thing of interest? Because it's an everyday item in Africa, but transported to Paris, it becomes an art object for Brancusi or for Nancy Cunard to wear and make a fashion statement from. And something similar is there in Lévi-Strauss's Triste Tropiques, the Sad Tropics. This is a theme in French anthropology that isn't there in British anthropology so much, and that's interesting. Because Larrie does have this sense that when all's said and done, as much as adventures like the taking of the Kono, capturing this sacred spiritual object and bringing it back to France, does not leave him with remorse, because there's no other way to obtain such objects. And because sacrilege is a grand notion, so he's sort of suggesting that it wasn't sacrilege to have taken this object, but obviously you interpret things according to a bias. The constant buying of objects leaves him perplexed, because he has a strong impression that we're going in a vicious circle. We pillage the Negroes under the pretext of teaching people to understand and appreciate them, the Negroes. So to understand the Negroes, he has to thieve from them. To teach other people to understand the Negroes, he has to thieve from the Negroes. So there's well, it's not a vicious circle, it's vicious. And ethnography is always bound up with this contradiction. The trouble is, knowledge about others means taking and making mileage out of knowledge from others. So Larrie is a great critic of anthropology in some sense, and yet also the advocate for tribal peoples. Right? He says it's up to us, whose profession is to understand the colonized societies to which we are attached for reasons that have nothing to do with strictly scientific curiosity, to be in some sense their natural advocates. Advocacy, it means to argue in their favor, right? Against the colonizing nation. So what is the role of anthropology? Is anthropology a part of colonization, or is it a kind of ombudsperson critiquing colonization from within, or is it a fake, not alternative, what's the word for it? A kind of critique that pretends to be critical when in fact that's exactly dialectically, that's what exactly makes it possible to go on being colonized. And we've considered these aspects, and yet we still have to collect all these objects and so on. So defending these societies and their aspirations come in conflict with national interests and so on. Bataille, that score is really interesting, and why he was a friend of, Lurie at that score is really interesting, and why he's a friend of Bataille, because Bataille was going through similar concerns about economics. And both of them then are also conversing with Walter Benjamin, the German literary and theatre critic who wrote about language, the arts, streets, Proust and Klee, and books and libraries and history and Sherazade and storytelling and technical reproduction that I focus on in many other classes. And in fact, Bataille hid Benjamin's last text inside the Bibliothèque Nationale. So it was hidden from the Nazis when Benjamin fled from the Nazis, and trying to get into Spain was blocked and committed suicide in Port Bou in the Pyrenees. To Bataille's credit, that he's protecting knowledge at the same time as he's questioning knowledge. Okay. I think I stop the recording, see if there are any questions.